I was giving my brother a ride home one day, and he agreed to talk to me about his experience with Catholicism. I always carry an extra tape recorder in my car. We were both brought up Catholic. I didn't know where he stood on religion at this point. I was guessing maybe very liberal Christian or agnostic. The gruesome image of the cross.
I mean, the human sacrifices stuff, that turns me off right there.
Yeah. But wasn't Jesus a human sacrifice?
Yes, that's
Exactly.
what turns me off.
Ah, okay. Well, that's but most Christians don't even look at it that way. So it's real primitive.
Grotesque.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I don't like about some of these religions. Like you've got that cross with the man crucified there, and it's such an agonizing thing. Here we're supposed to be praying for supposedly good things, and when you look at the cross, it puts into your mind some agony. I mean, how can anyone worship a father, a godfather, who does that to his son, who crucifies his son? I mean, what kind of a God is this that does?
Yeah, that would demand a sacrifice like that. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, there are ways of, if you look at it, that Jesus had a certain philosophy and he was willing to die for it. I can accept that, but the fact that it's like an atonement for us, or this was necessary. I don't agree with that at all.
People, when there were other religions like the Mayan religion, they had their human sacrifices too, and so. But this is all focusing on bloody negative things, whereas I think religion should be more focused on positive things that lift you up.
Yeah.
Why have a religion if it's going to make you depressed and focus? Every time you pray, you're looking at a crucifix of a man
being tortured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Remembering our first communions.
I was thinking back to this mass yesterday, talking about the wonderful day of one's first communion, and I was thinking back to my first communion. And I don't understand this. I wish adults would explain this. This is weird. I don't understand. What is this supposed to be?
They never explained it to you?
Well, maybe they did, but I didn't get it. And the reason I didn't get it because it doesn't make any sense. What is this? I don't know. Do you remember your first communion?
I remember after the first communion because I was relieved to get out of there.
Yeah.
I was getting out of the church after it was over. It was a ceremony that didn't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was either.
I remember going to catechism class, it was always so gloomy. It never felt uplifting. It never felt like I was glad to go to church, I was glad to pray, or glad to go to confession. Everything was like a burden and a pain and a gloominess and just a
the
negative.
The sinful nature of man. We were indoctrinated in that when we were young, and we didn't really think too much about it at that time, I don't think, until later you think, man, well, it's like branding cattle, or it's putting people down, and they're really not. They're not. They may do some very bad things now and then, but to say human beings are by nature sinful is to already prejudice them ahead of time, and almost like people live up to their expectations. Well, I'm a human being, I'm sinful, well, what the hell? You might start the ball rolling. Well, I remember experiments with teachers who expect well of their students, their students do better. Teachers whose expectations are lower down get students who do poorly. So maybe the same thing about the nature of man, the sinful nature. It's setting you on the downward course rather than upward course.
Yeah, I agree. Then, because Paul was Protestant and Ma was Catholic when they got married, so we were brought up as Catholics. Well, one of the big things that stood out in my mind was the fact that Pa was not Catholic. So, why, if Catholicism is so right, why isn't Pa Catholic? And so there was So if I had to choose between Pa and Catholicism, I would have chosen Pa because I trusted him a lot more.
Leaving Catholicism, sexual taboos.
You remember when you decided you were no longer Catholic, and what was the key thing that made you change?
Okay. About just before college, 17.
This would be still in high school?
Still in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Catholic teaching on the no sex before marriage really blew me away because I believed them, and so I was, I was told. My understanding was I'd go to hell if I masturbated or the most innocent sexual things that normal people go through at that time in life. The Catholic Church said no, you shouldn't do it, and so it was driving me crazy. I remember Pa actually took me to a psychiatrist. When I turned 18 and went to the first year of college, he brought me to a psychiatrist, and he didn't do me any good because he didn't. Well, he said, "Well, you believe that, so you believe that. You don't have to believe." But he didn't really.
You understand that you brought up that you had to believe it.
I'm suffering because of my beliefs.
Yeah,
he didn't recognize that.
Right. Yeah. Well, that is similar to me. I think sex was a big deciding. Well, when I had heard or come across somewhere along when I was a teenager that masturbation was a mortal sin. A mortal sin?
And so it means you go straight to hell if
right.
You die while you're doing it.
or before you have a chance to go to confession. Yeah. And then, well, the thing is, if I'm supposed to be sorry, then I want to be sorry. But if I'm not sorry, then something's wrong. Then so I checked with the priest, and he was quite definite. It is a mortal sin, and so that was like, geez. And that was like, a key point. There were plenty of other critical things too, including the hypocrisy of various people that I knew were Catholics, and I just didn't feel were that decent people, and saw other decent people that were not Catholics. So it made me question the whole thing. And then, step by step, by second year in college, probably, then I decided I'm going to leave the Catholic Church. This is not the truth. The Church doesn't represent God.
You know what I did when I first started changing over? Instead of going to Mass, well, I did walk there, but instead of going into the church, I took a long walk around town. I was faking it, as it were. So Mother wouldn't know. I would walk around town, but I wouldn't go to church anymore. It was about 17, 18, about that time.
Of course, Ma is very against the Catholic Church now too.
She is.
She's very, really puts down the clergy and so forth.
Dishonest rationalizing.
I mean, when you're a child, when you're young, you take it in because the others are telling you, the authorities are telling you, and sometimes you don't really understand until later. You work it out in your experience or a contradiction or
you come to our conclusion that they're simply wrong. That's from my firm conclusion. And I'm talking to some really smart Catholic priests and philosophy professors of BC that really.
What do they say
about Catholicism? Well, they get a rationalization for everything. It's just amazing. And the smarter they are, the more clever they can be about how they rationalize it. But I'm firmly convinced that it's a big rationalization process. It's basically, they make a big distinction between the principle that's held up and then the practice, and that the principle is true, but it's understandable and people don't quite live up to it. And so very few of them are willing to say people should not get remarried, period. Very few of them, if any of them, are willing to say, you do this, you do that, you go to hell. Only the conservative ones will do that, and there are very few of those. Most of them it's just a big self-delusion about distorting language, and it's some of the priests I've talked to, but they have to do that because they're stuck in that system. I mean, if you've been a priest for 20 or more years, you're very unlikely to start overthrowing the whole thing. And you try to come up with a rationalization for everything. And so if I point out something in the church Well, like the thing about bringing up kids. I said, well, isn't that not religious freedom, but religious coercion that you make the kids be brought up Catholic? But then they talk around it somehow, and it's not to them.
Well, I figured it out. That it's political, really. The Pope, birth control.
Yeah.
Without birth control, there are more Catholics being born.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes political sense. If you look at it political, not as a matter of belief, for the Pope to say Catholics should not use birth control because without birth control, there will be more Catholics born in each family than there would be without birth control. And the other religions, if they practice birth control, there will be less believers in other religions that do practice birth control. In fact, there was one or two sects that did believe in birth control and having as little sex as possible, and they were dying out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a major factor. I agree. But I guess intellectually, I guess the church doesn't want to. Oh, I think one of the priests explained it pretty well. I got it on tape. He couldn't reverse the earlier decision because then he would, if they did, then it would lose their control or their authority, or people would figure, well, then it was okay. Yeah, then it was okay for us to just follow our conscience, and we don't have to follow what the church says. And so they wanted to maintain their influence, I guess. And so the Pope decided to come out against birth control, even though the majority of his advisors were telling him to be in favor of it. It's just
you were talking about change. Now Catholic Church has a different approach, a more modern approach to some things. I went into the Catholic Church about a year ago, and I looked at some of those pamphlets they have, and I just curious. I bought one on sex, and it's so different than what we were taught as children, because it's more
permissive.
Permissive, yes. It's more with the times than it was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So the Catholic Church is sort of adopting to at least the language. They couch things and is more modern. So they haven't.
And so that's when I try to pin the priest down. Well, is masturbation a mortal sin or isn't it? and then they'll have to say yes, and they do say yes. But then they say about a mortal sin that you need to have it. You need full consent. All these various things. Then they give like the Catechism explains various things that could not mollify. What's the word? Mitigate your guilt, the degree of your guilt and so forth. But to me, that's just rationalization. It's the same as they've categorized masturbation with murder. It's the same degree of you go to hell, and that makes no sense. So you can't make various excuses for masturbation if you can't make the same excuses for murder. Well, he was having a hard day, and he felt somewhat angry, and he needed to relieve his emotions, so he killed somebody. So you can't be that serious. You can't.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm not expressing myself too well, but
no, I understand. The masturbation and the murder are in the same class of mortal sin, and so they. This is you go to hell.
Yeah.
You're right. They are rationalizing. There is a real difference, but they're not appreciating it. They're not.
Yeah, they're not admitting it. Yeah. Another priest. This was maybe a perfect rationalization. He said, "Well, we have to believe in hell, but we don't have to believe anyone's in there." Which, that you've never heard that before, have you?
No.
Because that's not the Bible, and the Church's teaching over the centuries has never said, "Well, there's hardly anyone in there." Nobody said that, but now they're saying that. So I've heard that a couple times from several different priests. So that it's a big, rational dissembling, I guess is one of the words they say. Did you ever hear the word dissembling?
I've heard it. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of obfuscate things and.
Oh, it's like assembly is putting it together. Dissemble is taking bits and pieces.
No, not quite that. Jeez, I looked up the word in the dictionary. I should have memorized it. Yeah. It's kind of like bullshitting. Is what
okay. Now
Current beliefs.
So what do you consider yourself now? Do you consider yourself agnostic or just no particular definition or category?
Well, I should have said this at the outset, but like the person in the Beatles song, "Nowhere Man, Nowhere Man."
Nowhere Man.
That's me. That's
That's
where
you.
I am. No,
Well, that's it. You could say agnostic, actually. You know, although you have certain beliefs in human nature or whatever.
beliefs may tend to fossilize my behavior. I don't want to get too because of the Catholic Church is bad not only in particular, but is bad in general because it made me so afraid to believe anything else because I didn't want to get set in another religion. But it's actually living that puts together your beliefs. It's how you live, really.
Yeah.
I think that where your beliefs come from, and not when you're a child, they teach you that. But as you get older, you have to learn on your own. You do things on your own. That's where your beliefs come from.
Well, it's interesting how you confirmed a lot of the stuff that I thought.
I worked for 7 years as a counselor for mentally ill people at a halfway house. Mike was a fellow staff member there. I found him to be a sensitive and caring person. I enjoy his company and I get a big kick out of his sense of humor. The world would be a better place with more people like Mike. Catholic sexual taboos.
I heard this on one of my motivational tapes that I listened to. It says, "A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still." And I love that because I tend to be headstrong about things sometimes, and I know the truth. I have the market cornered, and the reality is I don't know shit. Bleep that, please, David. I don't know crap a lot of times, and now that I'm in my 40s, it's finally hit me how smart I am not, which maybe means I'm actually smart.
Yeah, right.
No way.
What was the end for me for Catholicism? I don't know, it just seemed like these hard and fast rules that are just against people's happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that was critical for me, this is embarrassing to get on tape, but here it is. I found out masturbation was a mortal sin. What am I going to do?
It is?
Yes!
I'm going out that window right now. Mortal?
Yeah.
Oh,
See,
wow.
I wanted to know, just how serious is this? Because I don't think I'm doing anybody any harm.
Yeah.
And so I checked with several priests, and they said it's a mortal sin. And I can't believe this. I'm not, I'm not doing this against God. I'm not hurting anybody. And my overall concept of sex was good.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't mistreat anybody, and I believe in trying to keep sex within a good context.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was a big thing for me to hear that, and then to really struggle with that for a while, because I tried, and then really resented it. And these old guys in Italy are telling me how to run my life.
Nothing worse than old Italian people telling you how to run your life. Take it from a young Italian.
So that was one big thing, and I just thought, I have a list in here of things that I object to, and the basic things, I think the theology is irrational, and the moral codes are life-denying instead of life-affirming.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I left Catholicism. And I figured, to leave Catholicism, does that mean that God is not represented by anybody here on earth? It seems like the Protestants, they just make up their own minds, so there's no central authority.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to get over that to realize there doesn't have to be a central authority, a representative institution that represents God. So I decided to become Protestant, and as I said, looked at it, studied and thought about it over the years, and then in the last several years, there's a fellow out in Ohio who puts out a newsletter called Biblical Errancy, and not that I would say he converted me, but he speeded up the process by seeing all these things, just thousands of difficulties with the Bible that we're indoctrinated. I say we, people who grew up Christian or Catholic, indoctrinated to just ignore.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just you got homosexuals are stoned to death in the Old Testament, and adulterers are stoned to death. And Jesus forgives the adulteress in the New Testament. And you're supposed to obey, you're supposed to be circumcised in the Old Testament. New Testament doesn't make any difference. You have food restrictions in the Old Testament. New Testament doesn't make any difference. Then you get Jesus saying, not a jot or a tittle of the law will be changed. And yet he's radically changing it. And all this stuff just makes no sense. It's total contradictions. So in reading his newsletter and other stuff, I subscribe to Christian stuff and anti-religious stuff. We get both viewpoints. I decided that Christianity is just so false. But recognizing that it has some very, very good insights, and those are what you want to hold on to, and those are the things that represent the real God.
Catholic hypocrisy.
Do you mind if I ramble for a while?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I think we're all quite human and frail, and the more that we try and raise people up to these heights of being ultra religious and ultra righteous and so forth, I'm finding it out to be a lot of crap. Anybody I've ever thought was a hero, like I used to love sports figures, if you read any of these kiss and tell books now, they're all quite human and normal. He has a very bad reputation for not tipping people. And years ago when autographs didn't used to cost anything, one guy brought his son to get an autograph from because it was his birthday, and says, "I'm not going to sign that, whatever it was." And the father says, "I came all the way here from like East Overshoe, Maine," and he says, "You're going to sign the effing thing," he says, "or I'm going to make sure that you don't play baseball for a while." So he signed the thing. So bottom line is, I see people, priests, rabbis, whatever. I think we're all about the same, as being in the mental health profession. Every once in a while, like when I used to work at Brookside Hospital, all I was a lowly mental health worker, and yet I worked in the adult section. You'd get patients coming up to me every once in a while, and they'd say, "So-and-so is having a bad time of it. Maybe you can go talk to him." "Well, you're a professional. You'll know how to handle this." And in their eyes, I knew a lot more than they did. But you know what? They were more in the face down in the slime than I was, and they knew more about what the guy was talking about than I did. I might have known a technique for getting the guy to cease and desist for temporarily, but far too often we give too much, and I'm guilty of this too. We give too much power to basically people who smell and talk nice and basically conduct themselves like ideals, like we have in our brain, but they're not necessarily. The appearance is not necessarily real. It doesn't really reflect what the person's all about.
Yeah.
When you said about how the religion is very much against life, it's against nature. That's the thing that bothers me. So if you tell people you can't have sex and you can't think these thoughts and you can't be doing this here with your own body, then we are designed a certain way. To me, it's like telling somebody it's hot outside, but I forbid you to sweat, or don't you dare sneeze.
Mike's Catholic experience.
When we moved to Salem, at one point my father said, "We're going to start going to church, you and me," and he says, "You're going to have communion." And I said, "What's communion?" He says, "Just get in the car." So, words to that effect. He was a man of very few words. I loved him. The last few years of his life, he and I became very close, thank God. But this was my first brush with organized religion, and I guess it planted a good, realistic bad taste in my mouth, I guess is what I want to say. We went like in January or February, and he said, "I want my son to start going to communion class and going to Sunday school." And I guess a lot of the other kids had been in since September, and the priest gave my father a tongue lashing, and I didn't remember it that well, but my father from time to time would talk about it, and I'm thinking to myself, if this guy's a man of God, why is he treating another man of God, meaning my father, like shit, Because, see, that was, I have tons of stories. You stop me when you want me to, take a breather, but I saw the hypocrisy, and I won't say it's just that religion, but a lot of these people with the black outfits and the white collars, they masquerade as holier than thou types, and in reality, they were, I think I was holier than they were in many respects, truly holy, more spiritual. He gave my father hell. My father got me into the class. I started going to class. I used to wonder, reading the catechism, all we do is say the same thing over and over again. I didn't know what it meant. Christ is the embodiment. I thought I'd remember it to this day because we went over it so many times. But I'll never forget how the sister, the nun that was teaching our class would say periodically, and this coming Monday you have to know, or Wednesday, whenever, you have to know all your lessons and you have to know them forward and backward because there's going to be a test and this is going to determine whether you get communion or not. And so I'd be all ready for that Wednesday. We'd go in on Wednesday, take the test, I'd do well, and it turns out that next week we had the same test on the same material, and that was actually the test of the century. It's like, how in boxing every year there's a fight of the century. And I started to write, as a 8-year-old or 9-year-old kid, I'm starting to say to myself, these people are just playing games with us. Here she is saying, once you pass this, then you're going to get your communion. And then the next week she'll say, nothing is in stone. This is the week that you have to pass the test. And it went on and on and on till I finally went to Catholic high school. And that's where I became very bitter at least toward that organized religion. I guess being very left-brained at the time, I couldn't reconcile the fact that I went to Sunday school on Saturday. I thought to myself, something is amiss here. But that particular teacher was a pretty decent guy. Following year we had this woman who was a real knockout, and I attended all the Sunday school classes that year too, but not for religious reasons necessarily. I made the decision to go to Central Catholic High School. It was my own decision. I thought it would be good for me morally, plus education-wise and all that. I felt like it's not that my cousins who had already been to Central Catholic High School, which was all boys, they made it sound like there was a sense of community there and uprighteous type of people, and that sounded great to me. Well, I don't think I went there with my head up in the clouds, but I certainly, time after time, I felt like these people were supposedly these priests and brothers who taught us. They're the male equivalent of the nuns. And they were some of the worst SOBs I've ever met in my whole life. They were very big into corporal punishment. When they would hit a kid, they seemed to relish what they were doing. They didn't seem to do it like, I have to teach him a lesson. They seemed to relish what they were doing. I got hit just once. I have a habit when I'm, the little desk that you have in high school with the little arm that comes out this way? Yeah. When I'm writing or thinking, I do like this, and I'm writing. Well, the brother came by, and in English class, he didn't like me because I was the top student, and all the kids who were his favorites, whose fathers he knew through the different men's organizations and used to be heavy contributors, they used to have to sit in the back because he used to see this, the smartest in the front, the top number one student at the first row, first chair, and then ultimately the flunkies at the back, which are most of his. He ended up switching that system over time because I was consistently every 6 weeks sitting in that chair. So to make a long story short, he hit me with he had this long rope that was tied around his waist, and it had like a ball at the end with some tassels to it. I'm sure there's a fancy name to it. And he smacked me with that across the side of the face. He says to me, "Rizzo, wake up." And I wasn't sleeping. I never slept in school. I always took it very seriously. And I got very mad, and I glared at him, and he was about maybe 5'10" and 260 pounds, so I certainly wasn't going to do anything. I was never a physical fighting type anyway. But things like that made me wonder about, these people are supposedly representatives of God, and here they are being SOBs on a daily basis, on a per capita basis. I couldn't find too many of the people that wore the cloth to be real, genuinely decent people. Mm-hmm. There were some.
Mm-hmm. Now, but the big thing is, does that invalidate Catholicism?
Yeah, I see your point, I guess, but to me, it just gave me a flavor of what was going on. I just figured, over time, I started to figure that I bet public school was less lethal, less painful, because I was scared for about 3.5 years of my high school experience, and I wasn't a troublemaker. I did all my studying and everything, but there they were big into working with intimidation. They were very political, and they didn't seem to exude a sense of grace about them. And I'm not saying they were all supposed to be able to walk on water and touch people's shoulders and the crutches would be gone and they'd be able to walk again. But if you look at them as the kind of men that they were, a lot of them, they really sucked. You pardon my French, but they really did.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, you see a lot of stuff like that, and it makes you wonder, what's so special about these people? A lot of them were drunks. A lot of them ate to excess, and not saying they all do, but I'm just saying, when I meet a priest, I'm tempted not to call him Father, Father Roberts, or nowadays it's more, they make it more user-friendly, Father Mickey, Father Ed, that makes it nicer and all that. I'd rather just call him Ed or Mick or whatever, because he ain't my father, and I don't observe his station in life as being fatherly in any way to me. But I'm just a little bit bitter, I suppose.
Yeah. No, but all that you say is it doesn't by itself invalidate Catholicism, but it certainly makes you doubt it. It makes you want to look at what's behind it.
Well, I'm a big believer that the proof is in the pudding. That actions speak louder than words. Yeah. I just I don't think my expectations were that far out of reality. And in the process, it was not just a huge disappointment what I encountered there, but there was a lot of angst that was produced. It was very, very upsetting. It was the worst 4 years of my life by far. But how do you say it? The pièce de résistance?
Yeah.
Was we had all seniors had to go on this religious retreat at the end of the once you get into the spring semester of your senior year. So about 30 or 40 of us from a couple of different homerooms, we went on this retreat up in Hudson, New Hampshire, the Oblate Retreat House, and I always used to refer to it as the Oblate Spheroid Retreat House, where they teach you how to play football. I enjoyed the retreat. We talked about a lot of things. The guy that was like the number one in the class, he was brains. I won't mention him to you, but he's somebody you've probably read about in the newspaper. He and I had talked for a while there about, I'm not going to go to communion anymore. I'm not going to go to communion anymore, I told him, because I says, I don't buy that. I'm not going to go to confession in order to go to communion. And he says, well, I agree with you, but I don't know. So we talked. We ended up sitting like a couple rows apart in church the next day, and he went to communion. And then he comes over and tells me at the end of the performance, because I didn't go, he says, I guess I'm too image conscious. The final day, and it's like you were assigned, if you didn't choose someone to go have confession on the last day, then you were assigned someone. It's almost like having a public defender assigned to you, So they gave me this old priest, he just celebrated his 99th birthday, I think, that week.
Now, this is going to be your last confession?
This is going to be, of the retreat. And I went in reluctantly, and this was also the time when, in order to make the religion, and specifically confession, the confessional experience more user-friendly, you would sit in a chair and talk to the priest, much like you and I are doing, and rather than talking through the screen like they used to have in the confessionals years ago. So he says, sit down, So I sat down, and he says, would you like me to hear your confession now? And I said, to be honest, Father, I wouldn't. So this was a big deal. In 1971, some snotty-nosed kid who was 17 and 9 months, and he couldn't believe that. Now, he didn't get mad, but he couldn't believe. And he said, what did you say? And I says, I really don't feel like I want you to hear my confession. Now, through the years, my aunt, who was very anti-religion, and my grandmother, who was very, very much a theist, and yet she hated nuns, she hated priests, she hated all kinds of religious folk. My aunt always used to say this one story about, she told one of her friends at work, at the shoe shop where she was working, how she had met Cardinal Cushing the day before, because her husband was in business, and they get invited to a lot of these fancy places, fancy affairs. And Cardinal, at the time he was either Archbishop or Cardinal Cushing, So one of the very religious women at the shoe shop said, "Oh, you met the cardinal? Did you kiss his ring?" And my aunt very seriously said, "No, I didn't." And the woman said, "You didn't?" And my aunt says, "No, of course not. How the hell do I know where his hand had been last?" And I thought that was a great response. You know? I mean, you talk about idol worship, IDOL, that you know, kiss somebody's ring, that's ridiculous. So that I kept that in mind, and other things we had talked about, which is going to be reflected in my conversation with the priest. So he couldn't understand why I didn't want to have confession. And I said, it's nothing against you personally, but I just don't buy this system. I don't believe what's going on here. And he says, "You don't want me to hear the sins that you've committed?" I says, "You're not about to tell me what you've been doing wrong, right? I don't think it's fair that we can't do it both ways. It seems very inequitable," although I didn't know inequitable back then. It seems very unfair. Like I said, I can't take credit for all of those gems, if you want to look at them in that way, but many of them, it's like I had the rumblings inside, and my aunt basically provided me with a little bit of eloquence in order to speak my mind. So he was upset, and then I ended up, I wasn't going to give him my confession, you know. I know 2 or 3 confessions prior to that, but right before confirmation, I remember my aunt and my mother had driven me to St. Joseph's on a Saturday afternoon, and St. Joseph's is a very eerie-looking place on a Saturday afternoon with the long shadows that come in around 4:30 in the afternoon. When I got in to the confessional, there was only one person behind me. By the time I came out, there was about 8 or 10 people in that same line, and he had 2 lines coming in, you know. But I had, in those days, you used to have to recount how many times you had done each sin. I don't know if you recall that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And so being the very anal retentive type, especially as a kid, I figured, well, it had been like 3 or 4 years since my last confession, so I figured, well, that's 1,400 days. I'm going to have a lot of numbers to give this guy. So, you know, and I went through, I think, all the commandments. I broke them all. I told him I've had, you know, I've committed adultery. I didn't know what adultery was. I've committed adultery 6,000 times, or 600 times, you know, because I figured, you know, out of 1,400 days, you know, I didn't know what I was saying. So, and you figure maybe he'd be laughing at this, because he was a fairly young priest, but he gave me holy hell. Pardon the pun. You know, when we were done, he says, "You haven't gone to confession for all this time, all these sins, all these things you've done wrong." And in reality, I look back, I hadn't done, other than like, hit my brother and swear once in a while, that was about it. But I figured, now there I am lying in confession. Jeez, that's double hell, I suppose. So he says, "For your penance," and then he says,
He's going to give me big numbers, huh?
"Well, do you know the rosary?" And I knew that the rosary meant it was a heavy sentence, so I said, "No, I don't," because I really didn't. But I think I would have lied to him even if I did, because it's about 50 Hail Marys and a lot of Our Fathers and
at least.
trip to Lourdes and all that. So I said, "No." So he says, "For your penance then, say 10 Our Fathers and 10 Hail Marys." Or maybe he said 20 of each. I don't, because it took me a long time. They used to have to go up to the altar and say them.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I get out, my mother and my aunt start giving me hell. Here I am shaking inside because the guy just told me I'm destined for the gates of hell, or whatever they have down in hell, probably a drive-through. My aunt says, "I've seen about 60 people come out, you're still in there." I says, "Look, I just had a very rough time. We went to see a movie that night at the drive-in movie, and I couldn't concentrate. I was so upset." So I mean, add that to what like I said, a lot of these other experiences, and I feel like I don't think these people that they promote necessarily good emotional, spiritual, mental type of health. I just don't. I think if the cornerstone of a lot of what you do is based on fear, there's something major wrong there.
Yeah.
That's what I saw.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you absolutely.
Well, that Monsignor that yelled at my father, he yelled at me one time. I was in the back of wherever we were having confirmation practice, and I heard this Monsignor Cahill was his name. "May he burn in hell!" Okay. And really. And I heard him say something about when you come to the front of the line, and I couldn't hear. I was listening, I couldn't hear. So I get to the front of the line like a half an hour later, and I'm standing here, and there's a girl that's standing over there, and he says, "You know what to do," and I stood straight like that, and he grabbed me by the shoulder, he says, "Stand next to her," and he was an SOB, he was a son of a bitch, really, and that's the nicest thing I could say about him. few years after that, he was picked up for drunken driving coming from a party. So I felt like, see this, there is a God. They just ain't in the religion that get.
Yeah. So, but it seems like a huge part of your rejection of Catholicism has to do with the people. Now, what did you feel about like the theology or the ideas of it, or
the little that I recall about reading the Bible? I mean, when we read it at school, it's going to have their slant. The brother is going to give his slant on what it's saying. What's the word I'm looking for? I couldn't understand why there was a lot of unforgiving, intolerant type of stuff being done by God, by His Son, and so forth. I also couldn't understand a lot of the rules and regulations. The
Catholic ones.
Yeah, don't eat meat on Friday.
Yeah.
I mean, this is how neurotic I was about it while I was still a practicing Catholic. There was like a Wednesday, back when we had like Wednesday Sunday school, when I had the shapely Sunday school teacher. I had gone to confession that day, and then like a couple days later I swore at my brother or hit him or something. So I went to confession that Saturday as well. Now, and I didn't tell the priest, it has been 2 days since my last confession. I said it has been 1 week. So there, I guess I'm just a pathological liar when it comes to going to confession. But I guess the way they operated bothered me. The fact that it seemed back when they were practicing it in Latin especially, it just seems like it's a good way to stay in shape, all right, now please kneel, please stand, please kneel some more, please shake hands with this one, please do. It seemed like a lot of sheepishness to me, and that's what bothered me. There wasn't the glorification of people as people. You asked me about the theology. I don't remember much about it that I could say, that makes a lot of sense.
You go to college after that? Or?
I went to a Catholic college.
No.
But I chose Merrimack College.
Oh, so you went to Merrimack?
And so it didn't seem as religious and as into like corporal punishment and the dogma at that level as it was in high school.
Yeah.
So I mean, we had to take 3 religion class of the core requirements. We had to take 3 religion, 2 philosophy, and then eat one of either or, which I chose another philosophy. And that brought me even further away from organized religion. I read about Marx, and I read about things that I've since forgotten about. If you're going to follow what they tell you, you're doing everything wrong. There's not a thing you can do right. To me, it's almost like you put a bunch of psychiatrists in charge of like a certain town, and it's up to them to determine when everybody is free to stop going to therapy. Well, if they're making $100 an hour, they're probably not going to tell you you're cured right away. That's what I'm saying.
So do you feel you've developed an alternative religion for yourself?
Mike Koresh here. Not religion per se. What I've tried to do, I've tried to observe in life. I try to observe people and creatures doing what I think is the right way to do things, and then I try and emulate them. I don't have a religion. I'm not a formal religion type of person. I'm not a formal anything as time goes on. But I believe that when the spring and summer start to flow, start to come into our lives. When I stand by this window and I do my stretching and stuff, sometimes I can see the sun coming up. That to me is a religious experience. That's God either winking to me or saying hello or something. Just to get back to Catholicism, I think there's a reason why a lot of Catholics I know, they don't seem very functional. They need to follow in line. They like being sheep, basically. That's what they seem to do. I don't think they have a good explanation for a lot of what goes on, but they'll give you the party line. And to me, that's not enough.
At this point, Mike's girlfriend came home from work and we had dinner. Healing services.
They have people fill out cards ahead of time. They sneak them into them. They feed all the information to the preacher, and then he goes and says, "I asked the lady in blue with the sore ankle." But those things, it's like a conspiracy. Everybody wants it to be true, and so they play along.
And man, it's sort of like the Three Stooges years ago. They owned a restaurant, and at one point, these two rough kind of looking guys, they wear their suits and then the Walter Winchell type hat. And one of them looks up and says to Larry, the waiter, he says, waiter, tell me something, is this steak or veal? And Larry says, what did you order? He says, veal. And Larry says, then it's veal.
I have a cousin who's in the, I think she's in the Pentecostal movement. I was telling her one time about my Indian friend, and I said he's such a decent guy, and he's noble, and he cares, and he's kind, you know. She says, you know, he's not a Christian, and therefore that is not enough. What he did. The fact that he's a nice person. She was being a little patronizing to me. She says the fact that he's a wonderful human being is. She says that matters not. Doesn't matter.
That's Christian theology.
Yeah.
What did you say she was?
Pentecostal.
Yeah, that's a very fundamentalist type. You know, they believe the Bible very literally, and I think they're the ones that figure the end of the world's coming pretty soon, and they also speak in tongues.
Right, I used to go to some church, what do they call them? Not church meetings, prayer meetings. I mean, it seemed like a show, really. There's all these, it's like everybody has a turn, you know, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to speak in tongues, and then you go...
How do they do that?
Well, it's easy, you go... It's like you wait for, maybe you know more. You know?
No, I've heard it, but it's... You just sort of speak gibberish. You just let whatever consonants and vowels come out go, and then you develop a rhythm, and sometimes you repeat it, and you develop your own... It's like dancing, I guess, you know?
And then you wait a few seconds.
They're not like possessed to...
Well, no, they are. They consider themselves
possessed by the Spirit.
By the Spirit at the moment,
And then, like, they wait a few seconds, and then somebody goes, pray for an interpretation, and then some other guy will say, and B, and the 14 was under the B, and all this other stuff. And they go on and on and on. So, I mean, it's all, to me, it's all like jazz, only it's set to the Bible, you know? It's all impromptu stuff. Whatever you're going to do, improv.
You were there and you heard this?
Oh, yeah, it's kind of scary at the beginning. Because he told me, watch this. No, they...
If you're called on, do you have to do it?
No, it's not like you're called on. It's just like everybody's waiting. Everybody's waiting to like their 15 minutes of fame, you know. So even Abe, you know, I remember like he's sitting next to me, and they'll say anything else anybody wants to add, and he'll hear and he's rambling on for 10-15 minutes, and people are going like that. And then he finally, like, he starts to come up for air, and someone will go pray for an interpretation, and then somebody like Mickey goes, and the cow jumped over the moon, and we didn't make enough in the collection last week, and all sorts of stuff. And you know what's scary? They bring the kids. To me, it's like when on 60 Minutes when you see the little Ku Klux Klan kids wearing the little
that's what it's like.
You know, like this big...
And then another thing is it's dangerous when they have these services where there's healings taking place.
Yeah.
And people think they're being healed and they may not be. You know, like if a certain person we know who suffers from seizures went and thought he was cured and then decided to go swimming, he might be in trouble.
Right.
So I think it's dangerous.
But I don't know if it was his father Diorio who was pretty popular.
Oh yeah, I'm going to on the 12th.
Oh, find out if he can heal whatever.
Well, I know he can't.
Is there a fee to go to this?
$5, not bad.
Oh.
Because I got to drive those up the big. I'll tell you what the fee is. The fee is I got to be there for 5 hours. I got her answers on tape as to why is it you're still in a wheelchair and you come here to be healed.
And she thought it was working, or?
No. Okay. Well, her answer was.
I used to be in an iron lung, so a few more treatments.
I was like my sister. I was telling about this woman I was dating was at a healing service and was saying how this guy was told he could to have trust in Jesus and you will see, and take your glasses and step on them and you'll be fine. So he did. And he couldn't quite see, and he drove home. But then the next morning, he woke up, he could see very well. And so my sister, I was telling it sort of jokingly to my sister, and so she says, "Yeah, but now he walks with a limp because he's got glass in his foot."
I was wondering how he made it home driving without it.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
He
'cause he
said
had
it's dangerous, exactly.
He had faith.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Who was I? Oh, yeah, so what the wheelchair lady said. Some of the healings take time, over a period of time. Some people are healed physically, some people are healed spiritually. And people are healed in different ways.
Well,
So
you definitely can't pin him down.
Religion as a control mechanism.
Right now, you don't consider yourself part of any particular organized religion?
No, I mean, I don't go to church. I agree with what you said. You should be a nice person.
It's so simple.
Yeah. And I don't know what to believe because I can't believe really what was in the Bible. And obviously there's something, just the way everybody was created. But I have no idea what.
Yeah.
Basically, it reflects the beliefs of people way back then, right?
Actually, I think, yeah. Yeah.
What comes to mind is my friend from India, who's from the Brahmin caste, and I asked him about, well, is it true the cow is sacred and all that? He says the real truth of the matter is this was propaganda that was spread amongst the people to keep them from killing off all the cows, because the cows are necessary for producing milk and I guess whatever else, milk products. So he says that's why they came up with the belief. It's just a means of control, it seems,
Cool. Good expression, because I use that. Means of control. Yeah, that's what I think, yeah.
A Catholic might argue that Mike has based his rejection of Catholicism on his experiences with particular people rather than on Catholic theology itself. But I think the principle of actions speak louder than words has to come into play at some point, and it overrides any merely intellectual considerations. The palpable reality is that the Catholic religion breeds guilt, oppression, and hypocrisy. So much of what Mike said is very recognizable to me, and I speak as a former Catholic who has had mostly good experiences with individual clergy. Thanks for watching.